From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk. The McLaughlin Group is brought to you by Siemens. Every day, Siemens answers are helping build the future of America. Siemens Answers.
Are you still sleeping?
I just wanted to check and make sure that we were on schedule.
The first technology of its kind.
Mom and Dad, I have great news.
Is now providing answers families need. Siemens Answers.
Issue 1, Pacific Pivot.
I've said many times, the United States is and always will be a Pacific nation. America's security and prosperity is inseparable from the future of this region, and that's why I've made it a priority to renew American leadership in the Asia-Pacific. And the cornerstone of our strategy and the foundation of the region's security and economic progress is our historic treaty alliances, including with Japan.
President Obama is in Asia on a 4-nation tour that brings him to Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and the Philippines. It's a trip that has long been on hold. The president had to cancel a scheduled Asian trip last year during the government shutdown and canceled twice in 2010. The BP oil spill and the Obamacare debate, causing our traditional Asian allies to feel skeptical about the so-called U.S. pivot to their region. Asian allies also have felt deflated over the president's focus elsewhere, notably the crises in Syria and Ukraine. So the president is there to reassure. First stop Japan, where Mr. Obama was treated to a formal state visit by his host. Japan is the U.S.'s 4th largest trading partner, with $203 billion in goods flowing between the two nations last year, 2013. But there's an ongoing trade imbalance. U.S. exports $65 billion in goods to Japan, while Japan exports $138 billion to the U.S. In order to level that playing field, President Obama wants to boost the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a proposed 12-nation free trade zone that does not include China. If the TPP were to become reality, it would comprise the biggest trade accord in U.S. history, but there are hurdles. The U.S. wants a bigger foothold in Japan's automobile and agricultural sectors. Only 6% of autos sold inside Japan are foreign-made. And there's agriculture. The Japanese government protects Japanese farmers. Also this, the security front. Japan is in a dispute with China over a group of islands in the East China Sea that Japan has named the Senkaku. Both nations claim the islands. Now, for the first time, a U.S. President, Obama, has sided with Japan. Ahead of his visit, the president told the Japanese newspaper that the islands fall under the U.S.-Japan Mutual Security Treaty and said, quote, "The policy of the United States is clear. The Senkaku Islands are administered by Japan. We oppose any unilateral attempts to undermine Japan's administration of these islands." Unquote. Question: what are the main objectives of President Obama's trip to Asia? The Asian pivot. Pat.
In a word, security, John. You mentioned the Senkaku Islands, where Japan is in a conflict with China. Japan has administered these islands since the late 19th century. China has entered a claim for them, and this could go to a shooting war. Secondly, if you go to the Philippines and Malaysia, both of those places have islands in the South China Sea. The Philippines are in a conflict with China, and they want the American military support behind them.
In the Philippines?
In the Philippines. South Korea has a treaty with the United States to defend it against North Korea or to fight on its behalf, and they've had real troubles there. And the Japanese and the South Koreans themselves have a conflict over islands, John. But the point here is, United States has commitments to go to war for South Korea and for Japan and for the Philippines that date back 60 years to the early and mid-1950s. What has happened to America at the end of the Cold War, we made a terrible mistake. We failed to review all these security treaties and war commitments we've got. As Lord Salisbury said, one of the great failings in politics is to remain stuck to the carcasses of dead policies.
To deter
China's expansionist ambitions. That's one reason, and an important reason, why he went. Do you agree with that and his exposition of that?
I think the administration views China as a friendly economic rival. And I think they do see it as a rising power, and they do like the idea of aligning with the other countries in that region as sort of a buffer. But I don't think it's as direct an attempt to contain, as you put it. I also think these security arrangements are not, even though they haven't been reviewed, as you put it, I think they probably have, and I think the U.S. is sticking to them. The islands do come under our arrangement, our alliance with Japan, and I imagine if China actually invaded, and they're not even inhabited, they're a pile of rocks, but I think there is, the U.S. will stick by that.
Let's not get hung up on the islands, so to speak.
Well, right.
There's another reason why he went there, and it's a big reason, and what is it?
Well, it's
called
the market of the world.
The TPP. Do you know what the TPP is?
It's the market of the world.
It's the free trade agreement that we're trying to reach with, which America is trying to reach with a bunch of Asian countries.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership. Can you speak to that? Huh?
It's a huge free trade deal. It's politically going to be very hard. We saw that this week. People always like to talk about deliverables, a horrible word, but what are you going to come away with when you have a big summit? The Americans would be very keen to have some sort of gesture of real progress from Japan, but despite all the sort of state visit flummery and the delicious sushi that President Obama was given, actually he got a bit of a cold shoulder when it came to the trade side. In particular, the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said, our farmers, we are still very, very concerned about protecting our farmers, and these are extremely high cost, extremely kind of boutique farms that are protected from all foreign competition. So that's a real disappointment for the Americans this week.
You've got Crimea going on, or having taken place, and now you have an possible extension of that. Does Obama have to reassure those allies over there that he's not going to do anything? He's not going to do anything to encourage any kind of a Crimea arrangement over there, any kind of a move on them? You follow me?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Crimea raises a big issue for the United States, which is its credibility. And that has been an issue that has affected American policy ever since the president walked away from his commitments on Syria. So nobody really has any great confidence as to what the United States is going to do in the face of whether it's in Crimea with the Soviet Union or Russia, or the Philippines, or indeed in Asia. So it's a real issue for the United States, and he can go there and say the words, but he doesn't have the credibility to, in effect, deter
Yeah, but we
his
have
opposition.
We have a treaty with Japan. Ukraine is a friendly nation. Crimea is really tilting to Russia. These are very different situations. And frankly, if John McCain had been in the White House, we probably would have been in wars in all of these places. I mean, the president has kept us out of wars.
But I think Mort's point is exactly right. I mean, it was an idiotic thing to issue a red line on the Syrians, then have the American people say you're not going to follow through on it. But there's no doubt American credibility all over the world, and certainly, John, in Eastern Europe now, the Baltic republics, and also in Poland and Romania, they are terrified that the Americans are going to do exactly nothing to stop Putin if he moves into eastern and southern Ukraine.
But all the way, we can see American forces now in the Baltics and Poland. That's a big deal. He didn't have to send ground forces. He has, and that is a big deal.
600 troops in 4 countries.
I want to hear more about the pivot to Asia. Okay, why the pivot to Asia?
That's what Clyde Prestowitz wants to know. The president of the Economic Strategy Institute and a trade negotiator during the Reagan administration. In an op-ed in the Financial Times this week, Mr. Prestowitz says it's not Asia that should feel neglected, but the U.S. Quote, listening to the Asians, you would never know that the U.S. 7th Fleet has been stationed in Yokosuka, Japan, and tasked with patrolling the Western Pacific for the past 69 years. Or that there are 30,000 American troops stationed in South Korea and another 50,000 in Japan. America is committed to defend Japan and South Korea if they are attacked, but those nations are not committed in any way to defend America if it is attacked. Similarly, in the economic realm, the flow of benefits, they have been heavily in favor of the Asia-Pacific countries. Most of them have based their development on mercantilist export-led growth policies, using protectionism and currency manipulation to generate huge trade surpluses with the U.S. To what threat do these countries need reassurance of support? The obvious answer is China. consider that China poses no direct threat to the U.S. It is not going to invade America, nor is it going to try to seriously disrupt our economy, nor is it promoting a dangerous global ideology. Consider also that the Asian countries calling loudest for a U.S. counterweight are also expanding their trade and their investment with China as fast as they can. So it is not exactly clear what the U.S. gets out of the deal. Instead of answering the Asians' questions about the steadfastness of America's commitment to them, the president should ask them what they are prepared to do for America. Unquote.
Is Clyde Prestowitz right that it's not exactly clear what the U.S. gets out of the deal? So should President Obama press Japan and South Korea on what they are prepared to do for America?
Yes, John. Clyde Prestowitz is an economic nationalist. What he is saying is basically, Japan's been cleaning our clocks with trade surpluses for decades now. The Chinese have been doing it. All the Asians have been doing it. We've been providing them basically almost free of charge with their security. Maybe it's time for the greatest power in the world, when it provides security, to get payment for it in some kind. Maybe we run trade surpluses and they pay for the defense we're providing.
Japan could be a nuclear power overnight if they got the green light. This is a security arrangement that benefits not only our country, and that part benefits the whole world. It's a security arrangement that goes back 60 years, and I think it's going to be honored. And you don't toss that over and say, okay, now you're going to fend for yourself.
Why don't they pay for their defense if we're providing it? Why don't they pay us?
We didn't like the way they paid for their defense once upon a time, and I'm sure you remember that period. And I think our policies are still based on that.
I want to hear from Rennie.
I'm sure you feel the same way about Germany and parts of Europe as well. But maybe they could pay a little more. But I don't think I don't think you undermine.
Do you want to pick up any of these pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be based in China as a journalist. This is, China is an extremely disruptive rising power potentially, but is also unbelievably bound into the American economy. Think of all the American companies who manufacture, whose supply chains include a lot of manufacturing in China, but also here. These are all stitched into the kind of global patchwork quilt of globalization, at which America is a master. America does very well out of globalization in aggregate, whatever Pat Buchanan may think. And the absence of war, Eleanor is right, the absence of war and America as the preeminent security guarantor, it's expensive in terms of what we spend on ships and planes, but ultimately it suits America. And it's not something that we don't want to see Japan arming to the teeth under a conservative nationalist prime minister picking fights with the Chinese. We have an interest in peace in Asia.
Wait a minute, I want to hear more. Isn't it comforting to you that capitalism serves as a restraint? You understand his reasoning?
I understand his
reasoning. Can you
reasoning.
appreciate that, and would you care to echo that?
Yeah, look,
considering I think what you represent.
The problem that we have here in the United States is we have a weakened economy, and a weakened economy that we can look forward to for the next 3 to 5 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office. We do not have the resources we once had to be able to pay for all of this military support around the world. So we have to rebalance those issues with countries like Japan, and indeed with certainly with Japan.
All right, that brings us to the TPP.
Yes.
Is the TPP going to resolve any of our imbalances that you're talking about?
It will certainly help.
Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Right, that is a free trade zone involving a dozen nations, okay? We want to be a part of it so that we can export, because that would help the American economy significantly. And that's one of the issues we have with Japan.
You know where he's going over there, and do those locations and reinforce the idea that the TPP can be revived, that's not the right word, juvenated, electrified, and he can make something out of it.
I think he will have some influence on it. I just don't know how much, because a lot of those conversations are private. But clearly it would be in the American interest for them to do it.